Thanks for joining us. Let's take a look at what's happening right now.
The absolute wart in this investigation, in my opinion, of leaving that crime scene with evidence that suggests that this is not a missing person, um, the things that may have been or may become the real Achilles heel for this investigation.
And here's what I would wish at this point is that the sheriff would stop talking.
A quiet Arizona community is still searching for answers after 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie suddenly disappeared. The case, now about a month old, continues to raise new questions as investigators review updates and early decisions that may still shape the outcome. Reports gathered from multiple sources show that the situation quickly shifted from a routine missing person report to concerns about possible wrongdoing. Early information released to the public created two competing narratives. Was Nancy simply missing, or was something more serious involved? Since then, online discussions have intensified. People are closely examining reports about possible evidence, personal belongings like a watch, and newly noticed CCTV footage showing a vehicle passing through the area. Unusual details continue to surface in the search for Nancy Guthrie. According to publicly discussed reports, investigators have examined items discovered miles away from her home, including several gloves. At the same time, updates released to the public have appeared inconsistent, which has led to growing speculation online. Sources also suggest there may be differences in approach between federal and local authorities as the investigation moves forward. To better understand how cases like this unfold, experienced investigators have been analyzing the situation. One retired homicide detective with decades of investigative work has noted that proper crime scene management and disciplined procedures are critical in complex cases. Observers also point out that intense online discussion from the true crime community can sometimes complicate investigations, especially when speculation spreads faster than confirmed facts. Public attention around the disappearance of 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie intensified almost immediately. Much of that attention grew because of her reported family connection to a well-known television journalist, which quickly pushed the case into the national spotlight. When a missing person investigation gains that level of visibility, every update from authorities is closely examined by the public and the media. Early press briefings also played a role in shaping public reaction. Reports indicate that some officials appeared uneasy while addressing the media, which created uncertainty about how the investigation was progressing. When communication feels unclear, speculation often spreads quickly online. Within days, additional claims began circulating, including a reported message suggesting a possible ransom. Investigators typically stress that information like this should be passed directly to law enforcement so it can be properly reviewed as part of the investigation. Public discussion around the Nancy Guthrie case grew even more intense after certain information was shared widely before investigators could review it. Many observers believe that material connected to a possible ransom message should have gone directly to law enforcement instead of being released publicly. Once that information circulated online, the story quickly gained momentum and drew even more national attention. Part of the early confusion also came from how different law enforcement agencies communicate during major investigations. In some areas, sheriffs are elected officials, while city police departments operate under different leadership structures. Experts say those differences can affect how updates are delivered to the public. Experienced investigators often emphasize that during sensitive cases, managing public information is just as important as collecting evidence. When speculation spreads across social media and online communities, it can create noise that investigators must work through while trying to focus on the facts of the case. Questions have also been raised about how information has been shared with the public during the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. In many counties, sheriffs are elected officials, which can create pressure to communicate directly with the community. However, some investigators believe frequent press conferences can sometimes create confusion rather than clarity. Experts often suggest that structured updates, such as periodic written reports, can help ensure that information is accurate and coordinated with federal partners. This approach allows investigators to confirm details before they are released publicly. During earlier briefings connected to the case, representatives from federal agencies also appeared alongside local officials. Observers noted how those appearances signaled cooperation between agencies as the investigation continued to develop, and authorities worked to keep the public informed. Behind the scenes, cooperation between agencies is a routine part of complex investigations like the search for Nancy Guthrie. Local authorities typically lead the case, while federal agencies provide additional resources, specialized tools, and investigative support when needed. This type of partnership is common in missing person investigations, especially when the situation draws national attention. However, public discussion online has raised questions about why federal authorities have not taken control of the case. Investigators often explain that this is not how these partnerships normally work. Local departments generally remain in charge while federal teams assist where necessary. That public debate can place added pressure on officials speaking at press briefings. In earlier updates, local leadership indicated that future press conferences would only happen when significant new information becomes available, a step many investigators consider helpful in keeping the focus on confirmed facts rather than speculation. Confusion surrounding the Nancy Guthrie investigation has also been linked to how information has reached the public. Investigators often recommend that updates be delivered through official statements or by a public information officer, ensuring the message is clear and consistent. In this case, some updates reportedly came through informal media interviews and comments attributed to unnamed sources. Experts say that when information appears through unofficial channels, it can quickly lead to mixed messages and growing speculation. Law enforcement professionals typically stress that details in an active investigation should come directly from official agencies coordinating the case. When unverified claims begin circulating, they can take on a life of their own online, making it harder for the public to separate confirmed facts from rumors as the investigation continues. Speculation around the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie has continued to grow as people across the internet share their own theories about what may have happened. Investigators say this kind of attention often brings a wide range of tips, opinions, and unverified claims. In many high-profile cases, authorities report receiving messages from individuals who believe they have special insight or alternative explanations. While some tips can be helpful, many turn out to be speculation rather than evidence. Law enforcement professionals emphasize that trained investigators remain focused on verified leads and standard investigative work. Detectives typically continue reviewing evidence, following timelines, and interviewing witnesses while filtering through the large volume of incoming information. Although public interest keeps the case visible, experts say widespread speculation can sometimes create distractions that add noise around an already complex investigation. High-profile investigations like the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie often attract intense public attention, especially because of her reported connection to a well-known media figure. Experts say that when a case reaches national headlines, commentary from public figures and widespread online discussion can sometimes shift focus away from the investigative process. According to law enforcement professionals, many cases begin with a routine welfare check. A patrol officer or deputy is typically the first person to arrive, assess the situation, and determine whether further investigation is needed. If something appears unusual, the case is then escalated to detectives who specialize in handling complex incidents. Investigators note that this early stage is critical. The initial observations and decisions made by the first responding officers can influence how the investigation develops in the days and weeks that follow. Shocking mistakes at an investigation scene can change a case forever. Information reviewed from investigative discussions shows how the first hours inside a location can shape the entire timeline of events. In one example, often referenced by investigators, officers initially secured a home, while additional officials arrived to observe the situation. Several people reportedly moved through the area, while the first responding officer carefully examined items that might help establish timing. One detail stood out. A tray of ice on a kitchen counter appeared untouched, and the responding officer began noting the time, believing it might help determine when someone had last been there. He reportedly spent hours collecting nearby glasses and other items that could hold useful clues. Later, another official explained the ice had been used to make a drink after arriving at the scene. Moments like this show how easily potential evidence can be disturbed, even unintentionally. Investigators stress strict scene control is essential because early evidence handling can shape whether a case stays missing or becomes complex. Control of a scene is one of the most important rules in any serious investigation. Experienced investigators consistently explain that once a location is secured, access must be tightly restricted to protect potential evidence. Standard procedure in many departments, places, detectives, and crime scene specialists in charge of the area. Only essential personnel are typically allowed inside the secured perimeter, while other officials remain outside the boundary. This helps prevent accidental disturbances that could affect the collection of evidence. Professionals in the field often emphasize that these rules apply to everyone, regardless of rank. Maintaining clear authority over the scene allows investigators to focus on documenting details, gathering materials, and building a reliable timeline. In complex cases like the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie, careful scene management during the earliest stages can play a major role in how the investigation unfolds. The early moments at Nancy Guthrie's home may hold important clues about how the investigation began. According to information reviewed by investigators and public reports, deputies responding to a welfare check were first directed to the wrong address. After correcting the location and arriving at the proper home, they reportedly noticed signs that something unusual had occurred. One detail often mentioned in discussions of the case is the presence of small blood spots near the front porch, along with no response from inside the home. Observations like these typically prompt officers to begin a more careful assessment of the scene. In many departments, patrol deputies will contact investigative units and request support from crime scene specialists. Those specialists evaluate the situation and determine whether detectives should be called in to take over the case. Sources familiar with the process explain that once those early indicators appeared, the investigation officially moved into a more serious phase as detectives began reviewing the evidence. The size and resources of the local department may also play a role in how scenes are processed during investigations like the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Public records show the sheriff's office is a large agency with hundreds of sworn deputies and support staff, meaning multiple crime scene teams could be available when needed. Investigators typically spend many hours documenting and collecting materials before a location is officially cleared. Once detectives determine that the initial processing is complete, once the scene may be released. However, releasing a location does not mean investigators are finished with it. Authorities sometimes return later if new information surfaces. In this case, reports indicate that federal investigators revisited the property after becoming involved in the search. During follow-up visits, specialists may use search dogs or examine additional areas of the property, steps that investigators say are common when new leads appear during an ongoing case. The investigative work in the Nancy Guthrie case did not stop once the scene was processed. After evidence is collected, many items must be sent to specialized laboratories for further analysis. This can include digital data, biological samples, fingerprints, and other materials gathered during the search. Experts say this stage often takes significant time. Unlike television portrayals, forensic testing and digital analysis rarely produce immediate results. Each piece of evidence must be carefully reviewed and documented before investigators can draw conclusions. Reports also indicate that federal specialists with advanced digital recovery tools have assisted in examining electronic records and communication data. According to investigators familiar with the process, the steps being taken appear consistent with how complex cases are typically handled, even though the public is watching the progress closely. Original word count, 267 rewritten word count, approximately 50% shorter. 134, debate about how the Nancy Guthrie scene was handled, has continued online, but many investigators believe some of that criticism may be misplaced. Professionals familiar with complex cases say the focus should remain on evidence and investigative steps rather than assumptions made from the outside. Another major task in cases like this involves canvassing nearby neighborhoods. Investigators often go door to door, speaking with residents and checking security cameras to piece together a timeline of activity in the area. The goal is to identify anything unusual that may have occurred around the time a person was last seen. Reports suggest that camera coverage in some parts of the area may be limited or inconsistent, which can make this process more challenging. In many communities, concerns about privacy have historically limited the number of surveillance systems installed, a factor that can affect how much visual information investigators are able to review during a search. One detail that gained attention in the Nancy Guthrie investigation involved items discovered miles away from her home. Among the reports discussed publicly was the recovery of several gloves roughly 2 miles from the property. While the discovery quickly became a talking point online, investigators often caution that items found in an area do not automatically confirm a connection to a case. Mapping the surrounding neighborhood shows why the search effort is far more complicated than many people realize. Although some initially described the area as remote, records indicate there are actually thousands of residences and properties within roughly 1.5 miles of the home. For investigators, that means an enormous amount of ground to cover. Detectives and search teams may need to contact large numbers of residents, review security footage, and check countless doorbell cameras in an attempt to build a reliable timeline. Even when search dogs or specialized teams are involved, experts say covering such a wide area can feel like searching for a single clue within a very large landscape. Understanding the scale of the search around Nancy Guthrie's home helps explain why investigators face such a difficult task. Law enforcement sources say one of the first steps in cases like this is a neighborhood canvass. Officers typically speak with nearby residents, review security cameras, and try to determine possible entry or exit routes connected to the incident. Investigators may examine several possible travel paths, expanding their search outward to nearby roads, stores, and other locations where cameras might capture vehicles moving through the area. By comparing footage from different locations, detectives attempt to identify patterns or vehicles that appeared around the same time. The challenge grows even larger when considering the size of the surrounding region. Pima County covers thousands of square miles, much of it open desert terrain. Because of that scale, experts say locating specific evidence or a person within such a vast area requires time, coordination, and extensive resources. For investigators, building the full picture often means carefully reviewing large amounts of information. Gathered from across a very wide landscape, the sheer size of the search area continues to shape the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance. Detectives working cases like this must decide how far a neighborhood canvass should extend. Each additional street, home, and property increases the time and manpower required to check doorbell cameras, speak with residents, and review potential clues. Investigators say mapping tools and area analysis can help visualize the scale of the effort, but even then, the task remains enormous. Searching large residential zones and nearby open land can quickly become a complex operation. From the beginning, some experts reviewing publicly available information questioned whether the situation fit the pattern of a typical abduction. Early assumptions about the case did help bring additional federal resources into the investigation, which can provide advanced tools and specialized teams. However, professionals familiar with similar cases often note that when a person disappears under unusual circumstances, locating them can become extremely difficult. In vast regions like those surrounding Tucson, even experienced search teams may face major challenges when trying to locate critical evidence or determine exactly what happened. One of the biggest challenges investigators face in cases like the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie is the sheer difficulty of locating evidence across large areas. Experts often explain that even in major cities, finding a missing person without clear leads can be extremely complicated. Urban regions alone can cover hundreds of square miles, while nearby rural areas may stretch far beyond that. Open land, waterways, and isolated terrain can make searches even more difficult. Because of these conditions, some investigations continue for long periods without locating every piece of evidence. This reality often contrasts with public expectations shaped by television, where cases appear to resolve quickly. In real investigations, the process can take much longer. Another point that gained attention in the Guthrie case involves security camera footage showing a vehicle passing through the area. Investigators reviewing such footage typically work to align video timelines with other digital records to better understand when key events may have occurred. Investigators have also examined how timing and travel routes might connect to the Nancy Guthrie case. Based on publicly discussed timelines, some analysts believe a vehicle seen on nearby CCTV footage could have reached that location within roughly 6 minutes of a key moment in the timeline. Mapping the surrounding roads helps illustrate how investigators study possible routes through the area. By reviewing the road network, detectives can estimate how a vehicle might have entered or exited nearby neighborhoods. Another point that drew attention online involved gloves reportedly found in different locations, some discovered miles away from the home. While these findings generated heavy discussion, investigators often caution that items discovered in the wider area do not automatically prove a connection to the case. When detectives review evidence like this, they typically compare travel routes, road access points, and nearby destinations. Understanding where roads lead and where they do not can help investigators evaluate whether a location is likely part of the events they are trying to reconstruct. Evidence discoveries in the Nancy Guthrie case have often drawn intense public attention, especially as updates appear while the investigation is still unfolding. One example involved a glove found during searches in the surrounding area, which quickly became a major topic of discussion across news coverage and social media. Investigators explain that collecting items like this is standard procedure. During a search, officers often gather anything that could potentially be connected to the case. It is generally better to collect a possible piece of evidence and later determine its relevance than to overlook something important. The real value of such an item is determined later through forensic testing. Analysts typically examine whether DNA, fingerprints, or other trace evidence link the object to the person who is missing or to the location connected to the investigation. Because the public is seeing updates as they happen, each discovery can quickly become a headline. However, professionals note that many collected items ultimately turn out to have no direct connection once the testing process is complete. Investigators working on the Nancy Guthrie case are now focused on analyzing the large amount of evidence collected so far. Much of this work happens behind the scenes, where specialists review digital data, forensic samples, and other materials gathered during searches. Federal teams with advanced digital recovery tools are often brought in to help with this stage. One common step is reviewing cellular records from nearby towers. Experts say these datasets can contain thousands, or even hundreds of thousands, of connections within a short time frame. Analysts must gradually narrow the information down to the specific time frame and devices relevant to the case. This process can take weeks or even months. While the public may expect quick answers, investigators emphasize that careful analysis is necessary to avoid mistakes. At the same time, the intense media attention surrounding the case can create additional pressure. Officers sometimes find reporters and online content creators closely watching their movements, hoping to capture the next development in real time. Behind-the-scenes investigative work often looks very different from what people see in television crime shows. Law enforcement professionals say specialized teams are frequently used when authorities carry out search warrants or major operations. Tactical units may secure a location first, allowing investigators to safely enter and begin collecting evidence related to the case. Because many viewers learn about investigations through entertainment programs or online discussions, expectations about how cases unfold can sometimes become unrealistic. Experts note that real investigations follow detailed procedures that may not always match what is portrayed publicly. Digital evidence is another major part of modern investigations. In some past cases, investigators have reviewed surveillance video showing a suspect using a phone shortly before a serious incident. When that happens, analysts may work with cellular providers to identify nearby towers and review call activity within a specific time frame. However, these records can include tens of thousands of connections. Specialists must carefully narrow the data step by step, comparing it with video footage and other evidence before investigators can determine whether a particular device or individual is relevant to the case. Analyzing digital records in an investigation like the Nancy Guthrie case can be extremely time-consuming. When investigators review cellular tower activity, even a short window of time can produce a massive amount of data. In busy areas, a single 40-minute period may include well over 100,000 phone connections. Specialists must carefully examine that data and narrow it step by step until only the most relevant records remain. This work is detailed and highly technical, requiring patience and strong focus from digital forensic teams. Experts explain that while modern technology provides powerful tools, it does not produce instant answers. Each record must be checked and compared with other evidence, such as surveillance footage or timelines built by investigators. Because the Nancy Guthrie case has drawn widespread public attention, many people are closely watching every update. However, investigators emphasize that complex forensic analysis takes time as teams continue, working to identify the person responsible and bring clear answers to the case. The scale of missing person cases across the country helps explain why investigations like the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie receive such intense focus. National statistics show that hundreds of thousands of people are reported missing each year, while confirmed abduction cases are far fewer. Because of those numbers, law enforcement agencies must carefully prioritize resources. Conducting a large-scale investigation for every missing person report would require far more personnel and funding than most departments have available. In many jurisdictions, missing person units handle the initial reports and gather basic information. If investigators begin to see signs that something unusual may have occurred, the case is often escalated to specialized detectives who focus on serious incidents. That transition is important because the investigative approach changes once authorities suspect a possible crime. Detectives then treat the location and evidence with the same level of caution used in major cases, carefully processing the scene while continuing to search for answers about what happened. Investigations like the search for answers in the Nancy Guthrie case often move through different phases. Early on, authorities focus on gathering as much information as possible, collecting tips, reviewing evidence, and expanding the search for leads. Once that initial wave of activity slows, investigators shift toward a more detailed review of everything that has been collected. This stage involves re-examining tips, analyzing forensic results, and carefully building a timeline of events. In many complex cases, detectives may already have persons of interest in mind during this phase. However, identifying someone is only part of the process. Investigators must gather enough verified evidence to support any future legal action. Experts say this careful approach is essential. The goal is not only to understand what happened, but also to ensure that any case presented later can withstand close scrutiny in court. The public attention surrounding the Nancy Guthrie case has been unusually intense. Analysts note that part of that attention comes from the family's connection to a well-known television journalist, which has naturally drawn national media coverage. However, investigators caution that visibility alone does not determine the motive behind a crime. In some cases, incidents may involve individuals targeting a home because they believe valuables are present. At this stage, authorities have not publicly confirmed what may have motivated the events connected to Guthrie's disappearance. Another important factor is the limited information released about what investigators discovered inside the home. Law enforcement agencies often keep those details private during an active case. According to investigative experts, this approach serves an important purpose. When detectives eventually question a suspect, they rely on specific facts from the scene that only someone directly involved would know. Holding back those details can help investigators verify whether a statement matches the evidence collected during the investigation. One of the most discussed pieces of evidence in the Nancy Guthrie investigation is the surveillance video showing an unidentified person outside the home. The footage, often referred to in public discussions as the porch video, has raised many questions among analysts reviewing the case. Observers note that the individual in the video appears to be wearing distinctive clothing and carrying several items, suggesting the situation may have involved some level of preparation. At the same time, investigators often caution that appearances in a short clip do not always reveal the full context of what occurred. Certain movements captured on the video, such as the person interacting with objects near the entrance, have also been closely examined by viewers. Experts say details like posture, behavior, and timing can sometimes provide useful clues during an investigation. There has also been speculation online about whether the individual was carrying additional equipment. However, analysts stress that conclusions should only be drawn after careful review of the footage and supporting evidence collected during the investigation. As the Nancy Guthrie investigation continues, experts say public speculation can sometimes grow far beyond the confirmed facts. Online discussions often include theories and interpretations that may not reflect what investigators are actually seeing in the evidence. Analysts reviewing the case emphasize that it is common for people to misinterpret small details or draw conclusions from limited information. In many high-profile investigations, this kind of speculation spreads quickly across media and social platforms. Some observers also believe that limiting frequent public commentary during active investigations can help reduce confusion. Instead of constant updates, investigators sometimes rely on periodic statements that summarize confirmed progress while protecting sensitive details. Law enforcement agencies often release new information only when they believe it could generate helpful leads from the public. This approach allows detectives and federal partners to continue reviewing evidence, analyzing tips, and following investigative paths without unnecessary distractions. For now, officials involved in the case remain focused on gathering verified information and moving the investigation forward step by step. The discussion around the Nancy Guthrie investigation highlights how complex cases like this are often analyzed from many different angles. Experts who review major investigations frequently receive questions from the public, especially when a case gains national attention. Observers note that conversations about this case have focused not only on the evidence but also on the investigative process itself. Topics such as crime scene management, evidence analysis, and coordination between agencies are often part of these discussions. Sources following the case say the goal of examining these details is to better understand how investigations unfold and what steps authorities may be taking behind the scenes. While many aspects of the case remain unknown to the public, investigators continue working to gather evidence, review information, and pursue leads. Officials involved in the search are focused on reaching a clear resolution and providing answers for Nancy Guthrie's family. As the investigation into Nancy Guthrie's disappearance continues, experts say public attention can help keep a case visible while investigators work behind the scenes. Discussions across news programs and online platforms have focused on reviewing evidence, investigative procedures, and the challenges authorities face in complex cases. Analysts following the situation emphasize that real investigations rarely move quickly. Evidence must be examined carefully, leads must be verified, and investigators must ensure that any conclusions are supported by reliable facts. For now, officials remain focused on gathering information, analyzing evidence, and continuing the search for answers that could bring clarity to what happened. NCC News will continue tracking every verified update and forensic development. Thank you for supporting and watching this news channel. With you was NCC News and your host, Jim Parker. Stay alert, stay informed, and let's keep pushing for answers.